Today we are drawing a bug, watching fireworks, and then we're going to try to animate it. I just need to draw something that makes me happy today, and the highlight of my month so far has been watching the fireworks on bonfire night and looking down and seeing a little bug watching them with me in the corner of my window. I worry so much about wildlife at this time of year, so to know that at least one little bug was safe and sound and happy and watching the sky just come to life it just meant so much. So that's what I want to draw today. Little bug, fireworks, and then I've also been playing around with animation in Procreate. I want to try doing that as well because the best thing about fireworks is the way that they sparkle. Perfect illustration for it. I'm so excited. Let's go! I'm not sure what it's like for the rest of the world, but in the UK, November is a month full of fireworks. We have bonfire night officially on November 5th thanks to Guy Fawkes, but for the first 2 weeks of the month at least, it's safe to assume at least one of my neighbours will be having a firework display each night. And when I say night, I mean any time from 4 PM onwards. While I'm definitely in favour of more regulation around that, there's something about fireworks that is always so magical. When I was a kid, bonfire night was my favourite holiday. The only thing that came close to it was pancake day. On Tuesday, I was sat on my windowsill and I was watching them with my dog, and it was like I couldn't open my eyeballs wide enough. Like, it was so magical. The whole sky was glittery and colourful, and I looked down for just a second, and in the corner of my window there was a little bug, and he was just happily sitting, and it made me so emotional because I worry so much about wildlife during fireworks season, but it was nice to imagine at least one little bug was just safe and happy and enjoying the wonder of seeing the sky light up in a million different colours. Unfortunately, he's not a very factually accurate insect. I've just created my own little guy. I've given him some glasses because I thought, gosh, the last thing you want on bonfire night is for your contact lenses to go dry, so glasses it is. As soon as I finished the initial sketch layer, I've lowered the opacity, and then I've added a layer for his wings, a separate layer for his body, and then a third layer for the tree. I am really conscious with this illustration to keep the number of layers as minimal as possible and to keep them as organised as possible, because when it comes to animating it later on, that's going to make my job so much easier. I will link all of the different brushes that I'm using in the description, but at the moment I'm working with the dry ink brush. Apart from the legs though, because they're so skinny, I'm using the select tool to outline them first and then going in and colouring the area that I've selected, just to give it a bit more of a cleaner look and just to make my life so much easier. I really enjoyed the select tool. You can either draw completely with it the way you would a normal pen, or you can just select different points and it'll draw a straight line between each of those points. So I'm using a mixture of those to do the limbs and then go around where the knobbly knee will be, and then the rest of the limbs, if that makes sense. I love adding knobbly knees to insects or even most animals, to be honest. I just think it's such a funny little thing to add. It makes me so happy. Instead of redrawing the other leg, I'm just copy and pasting it. I don't need to overcomplicate things for no reason. Another helpful tip I'm using to draw his limbs is that if you draw either a straight line or an arched line and just hold it for a second once you finish the line, it'll snap into smooth or straight. So for example, with a straight line, if you hold it at the end, it will correct the line to be completely straight, and it also allows you to adjust either of the 2 points at the beginning and the end so that it fits the line that you want it to look. And the same works for an arched line as well. You can just pause at the end and it'll snap into a perfect arch, and then you can adjust it slightly for where you want it to go. I found that really helpful for each of the legs. I treated them almost like a finger, where it's 3 different cylinders all connecting to each other. I basically want him to be holding a sparkler and that to be the main part of the illustration. For his face, I'm just using a brown because I feel like black would look too harsh. And I'm using the same sort of trick before of holding a shape to do a perfect oval for his glasses. And then for his other lens, I'm just tracing around that first oval, pausing so that it snaps into place, and then clicking edit, and it lets me move it to the other side, and then just making that skinnier. I do that every time I draw glasses. I find it so helpful because if you're drawing glasses, one lens is always the same height, but the one further away should be slightly skinnier to the other. That's just a really helpful trick I use anytime I'm drawing glasses. And then it was time to add texture to the wing. I've added a layer above the wing layer and then set it to clipping mask and screen, and I'm using the Turpentine painting brush to add some texture, and then adding another layer on top and using the dry ink brush to add some stars and little sparkles and circles. I'm going to use the same pattern later when I'm drawing the fireworks so that I've got a repeating pattern going throughout the illustration. I haven't set this layer to clipping mask yet because when I'm drawing stars I just find it easier to draw them completely and be able to see all of them and then set it to clipping mask afterwards. I'm setting that to screen and lowering the opacity, and then I'm going in and adding a layer to divide the wing so that it looks like two wings next to each other. I'm erasing any of the stars that I've crossed over onto the second wing and then adding its own set of stars so it looks like two separate wings instead of one giant wing. Then I'm doing the same thing with a multiplier layer, and I've used the select tool to individually select each of the limbs to add the shadows to, just to make it easier so that I could do it all on one layer but still have control over where the shadows are hitting. I've got the opacity set really low for this layer because so much of him is going to be lit up in light from the sparkler and from the fireworks, so there shouldn't be any too harsh shadows going on for him, but I still want to add a little bit of dimension. And then I'm adding a little bit of blusher to each of his joints and his knobbly knees, and of course his little cheeks, and then adding that same pink to his wing to tie it all together. And it was finally time to draw the sparkler. I've added the sparkler onto its own layer because this is the element that I want to animate later, so being able to isolate it will be really helpful. I'm just using a very similar shape to the stars that we've drawn on the insect's wings and the stars that we're going to draw in the sky in a moment for the fireworks. And I'm drawing as many with sparks and stars coming off it as possible because it gives me a little bit more to play around with later when I'm making it sparkle and animating it. I know sparklers are quite controversial, but I've always been so dazzled and amazed by them, and my favourite way to celebrate bonfire night is to stand in the garden with a bucket of water and many pairs of gloves and my mum and a packet of sparklers. And now for the sky, which I really want it to look like the middle of bonfire night when there is 100 fireworks going off all at the same time from every different direction, and the sky is a million different colours, but there's like a slight haze and smoke to the air as well. I don't ever like using airbrushing in any of my illustrations. I like to have quite a lot of texture. I'm using the spray paint pens with the medium nozzle because it gives it a really lovely, almost like a gritty texture. I'm just adding little like dots and little bursts of different colour and layering them all on top of each other, duplicating that layer, setting the top layer to add, lowering the opacity, duplicating it again and setting it to clipping mask over the tree branches, because I feel like on bonfire night nothing looks the colour it should look. Everything is kind of a reflection of the light, and I think that looks really cool. And then I'm going back and lowering the opacity again because it's a little bit too distracting, and it's finally time to draw the star pattern of the fireworks. I'm doing the exact same technique that I used on the wings, and I'm just drawing as many like bursts of light and different stars as possible. I'm setting that layer as add as well, lowering the opacity right down, and then using the Gaussian blur adjustment just to soften the edges ever so slightly. After I've used that adjustment, I'm going in and adding a couple more fireworks just to give it a bit of variety on the ones that are in focus. And then I don't know about you, but where I live it rains almost every day in November, so all of the trees have little dewdrops. I'm adding those in on the same layer as the sparkler so that I can animate later. And then I'm adding a few final touches like some highlights to his antenna and a few little shadows to his branches, and it's all done. I'm so happy with it. So that I can always come back in later and change bits of the illustration or do different things to it, I'm not going to animate directly on this canvas. I'm going to pop out and select the duplication tool, and then we're going to animate over on that one, because in order to animate you need to collapse some of the layers because each layer acts as a frame. The only part that I want to animate is the sparklers and the dewdrops. Everything else I'm putting onto one layer and setting that layer to background so that it plays behind every single frame. Otherwise both frames will play one after each other rather than the background always being there. I've duplicated the sparkler layer, and on the second layer I'm going in and adding a few little changes, and then for those 2 layers I'm duplicating them and alternating them about 5 or 6 times. If I was doing something such as a car moving along, I wouldn't do this because I'd need each frame to be a continuation of the one that came before. But because this is more of a sparkle pattern, by having these 2 alternating layers, duplicating over and over and over again and then making the changes, it gives sort of like a baseline continuality and it stops it looking too chaotic. I need it to keep coming back to the same frame so that it looks like it sparkles in and out rather than just a wild unrecognisable pattern. Now that I've got the alternating layer set up, I'm going into each individual layer and making a really subtle change to each layer. For example, moving a star or adding extra sparkles, just a slight difference, nothing too major based on the one that came before it, but enough so that it's noticeable when you play it all together. I've got the onion layer turned on so that I can see the changes I've made to the previous layer, and every now and again I'm just clicking play so I can watch it all the way through and see how it's looking so far, and just check to see if there's any layers that I may be neglecting more than others. And then I repeated those exact same steps to the little dewdrops falling off the trees. I based it on kind of if the insect was walking across the branch and the branch was like vibrating up and down, the little drops that would fall off and catch the sparkles of the light. I've got the settings of my animation layers set to ping pong and 5 frames per second, and the onion frame opacity is set to 30% so that I can clearly see what the layer before is, but it's not so distracting that I'm getting confused on what is on this current layer. I played around a little bit with the different frames per second. The higher the number, the faster it runs through all of the frames, and I think for this specific illustration it looks really nice the slower it is. It reminds me a lot of the lights that you see at Blackpool Illuminations, where it kind of runs through in a bit of a cycle. And then it was finally finished. Oh, this was so much fun to do. I really should animate all of my illustrations because it's so silly to make little bits come to life. Thank you so much for watching today's video. It was so much fun, it was so silly, but I'm so happy to have a little momentum of my night watching the fireworks with the little bug. If you enjoyed today's video, please consider giving it a like and subscribing. Every week I post a new art video. And yeah, it's nice and fun. Bye!